Good afternoon, my friends. Shalom Aleichem. My name is Lisa Roy. I am the manager of Adult Daytime Culture and Education at the Miles Nadal Jewish Community Center, which is located in downtown Toronto. It is truly my honor to welcome you all to the Miles Nadal JCC for today's very special event, the 2024 Canadian Jewish Literary Awards Winners Gala. It is wonderful seeing so many familiar faces here in our theater. A special welcome if you are joining us for the first time, and a warm hello to our at-home virtual audience. If you are in the room with us, kindly turn your cell phones to vibrate or to off. Traditionally named Turtle Island, some thousands of years ago, the land upon which our community center sits is appropriately known as the gathering place in the dish with one spoon territory. Spadina, derived from the Anishinaabe word Ishpadina, meaning high hill or going up the hill, is the name of an ancient indigenous trail. We are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, meet, and learn on this territory. May we aspire to learn more about the Indigenous people's history, as it is forever intertwined with our own. In these turbulent times, fraught with rampant global anti-Semitism, including book banning, author profiling, literary boycotts, censorship, and journalistic bias and omissions, it is critical that we take the time to celebrate, read, study Jewish-themed literature to ensure that our roots, languages, and history are kept alive, relevant, and part of the conversation. Today's event is co-presented by the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards and is presented in partnership with the Israel and Golda Kaczynski Center for Jewish Studies at York University. We are very grateful to Grzinski Bakery for their generous discount towards our dessert reception. Please join me in a round of applause for our dedicated volunteers who were here early this morning: Carolyn Burns, Gabrielle Rosen, and Mary Pat Moore. A huge thank you to my wonderful JCC colleagues, Deanna DiLello and Isabella Corelli, Technical Director Peter Fellhaber, Al Green Theater technicians Tiffany Yaw and Shay Santati up in the booth, and our front of house staff, Daniel, Meirav, Neas, Tanya, and Richard. And now, it gives me very great pleasure to invite Edward Terpunsky, Chair of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards, to open today's ceremony.
Hineni, here we are, we're seinen da. These are challenging times. With the distressing rise of anti-Semitism, the Jewish community often feels under siege. We hope that the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards stands as a beacon of hope and resilience amidst these troubling currents. By being here, you are showing courage in not giving in and giving up. As always, I'm privileged and honored to be the chair of the jury for the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards and your host for this afternoon. This is the 10th successful year for the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. It's the first year that we are at this beautiful Al Green Theater and in partnership with the Miles Nadal JCC. I want to thank Lisa Roy and her team for making us feel welcome and for the work they put in to make all of this happen so wonderfully. Over the years, the Israel and Golda Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York has been another vital and gracious partner in helping us to present the awards. I want to thank them. I also want to acknowledge our donors, our benefactors, our supporters, and the members of the community who have helped us throughout the year. Through the generosity of our patrons, we're able to sustain the awards program. Adam Furstenberg began the Canadian Jewish Book Awards 35 years ago in 1989. He joined us as part of the founding team of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards to keep the spirit going. May his memory be for a blessing. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards is a celebration. It recognizes and rewards the finest Jewish writing on subjects with Jewish themes. With these awards, we're doing our best to come together as a community and share the values and creativity that defines us, affirming hope, life, and acknowledging the authors who provide comfort during difficult times and more joyous ones. Culture is a major measure of the vibrance of Jewish life in Canada. If I could borrow a thought from the women's suffrage movement of the early 20th century, life's bread is home, shelter, and security, and the roses of life are music, education, and books. More than ever, we need bread and roses. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards contributes to the health of that common culture by promoting Jewish ideas, Jewish creativity, and Jewish scholarship. Honoring the best Jewish books of the year allows us to better understand ourselves and our collective past, our shared present, and the uncertain world of our future. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards grows in stature every year and has become a cornerstone in the Canadian Jewish community's cultural calendar. Although these are challenging times, we are growing even stronger. Last year, we created the Irving Abella Award in History. It will be given annually, supported by the Friends of this Giant of Scholarship, who left an indelible imprint on Canadian Jewish studies. By recognizing the finest books with Jewish themes and subjects by Canadian authors in a variety of genres, the awards build profile in the creative achievements that reflect these themes and values. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards has so many good submissions this year that the jury was hard-pressed to decide. But we discussed, we debated, and we persevered. The depth and the breadth of the books we considered shows the vibrancies of the culture and the appeal of Jewish themes for fiction and nonfiction writers. While the cash value of the prizes we're giving out this afternoon is significant for the winners, for the writers, it is the reputation and standing of this jury that underscores its importance. I'd like to introduce the distinguished jury who worked so hard to narrow it down. Rona Rado is an award-winning author of 15 children's books. Andrew Cohen is a best-selling author, an award-winning journalist, and was an associate professor of journalism at Carleton University in Ottawa. Mark Fryman holds a PhD in modern thought and literature and taught at the University of Toronto. As a lawyer, he was Deputy Attorney General for Ontario. He was the president of the Canadian Jewish Congress. Alain Goldschlager is Professor Emeritus at Western University, where he founded the Holocaust Literature Research Institute. He has published or edited 26 books in English and French on literature, semiotics, genocide, and the Holocaust. Anna Porter is one of Canada's most notable publishers and editors. She founded Key Porter Books. She's the author of 5 novels and 5 nonfiction books, including Kessler's Train, which won a Canadian Jewish Book Award. Unfortunately, Anne is not going to be with us today because her husband is taken ill and she's looking after him. Sandra Rabinovich is the founding producer of the acclaimed CBC Radio literary program, Writers and Company, hosted by Eleanor Wachtell. She's produced award-winning in-depth interviews with 14 Nobel Prize winners and such notable Jewish authors as Saul Bellow, Philip Roth, and Amos Oz. I'd like you to recognize the jury. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards is honoring 7 outstanding books for 2024. You'll meet the authors later and you'll hear more about their books, and you'll be able to buy autographed copies as we mingle over dessert. I would like to quickly mention their names and their books. Sidura Ludwig is the recipient of the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Children for Rising, her yummy book about the joys of making challah. Harriet Alida Lai is the recipient of the Fiction Award for Let It Destroy You, which is based on the true life of a Jewish physicist who worked on the first nuclear bomb and the moral dilemmas he faced. With great power comes great responsibility. The Canadian Jewish Literary Award in Yiddish goes to Goldie Morgentaler for her formidable translations of In the Land of the Postscript, the complete short stories of Chava Rosenfarb. Chava Rosenfarb is Goldie's mother, was Goldie's mother. And the book is about Holocaust survivors after the Horban. Writer, photographer, and social critic Joel Culiner is the author of Those Absent on the Great Hungarian Plain, which takes the award in Biography, Memoir. It traces her multi-year journey to find traces of the Jewish presence in rural Hungary after the Holocaust. Talking to Strangers by Rhea Tregebov shows that she's among the most significant poets of her generation, and she's won the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Poetry. Alana Wolf is the author of Faithfully Seeking France, tracing the life of Franz Kafka. She's the winner of the award for Jewish thought and culture, but unfortunately, she's unable to attend today. She's in Israel, and it's very difficult to get out because flights are so scarce. You will see her on video, and her son Noam will accept on her behalf. Also missing is Michael Cater, the winner of the Irving Abella Award in History for After the Nazis, the story of culture in West Germany. He's 87 years old and has recently had 2 serious operations. We wish him a speedy and full recovery. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rona Arato, who will present the first of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards.
Hi. Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm presenting the award for the youth and children's book, Rising by Sidura Ludwig. This is a quiet, joyful story celebrating a Jewish mother's tradition of making challah with her child. Merges a lyrical text with stunning illustrations, drawing connections between kitchen chemistry, timeless traditions, and the pleasures of everyday Jewish life. Rising bubbles with the joy of family and friends coming together to share the warmth of Shabbat, and includes the author's favorite challah recipe. When we read this book, what really hit us as a jury, and what hit me when I first read it, is the joy and the positive attitude, towards Jewish life, especially this year when we've had so much negativity. Reading this book was so uplifting, and it just speaks to the love of family coming together. And as I've said with Sidura, you could substitute samosas or empanadas or pita or almost any, culinary delight, and it would still be a book about family and joy. So it speaks to us as a universal story of love, of family, tradition, and as I say, most of all, love. So congratulations, Sidura, and I would like to present you with this award.
Thank you. Thank you, Rona. I'm so honored to be here today and accepting this award. Thank you to Rona Edward, all the jurors, and everyone involved in making the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards happen. The world needs Jewish books. Now more than ever, we need to celebrate and promote our stories. I wrote Rising almost 5 years ago during the beginning of the pandemic. When we were all locked down, everything felt chaotic. I was used to working from home. I was not used to my entire family working and learning from home. Everything we understood in terms of our routines during the week changed overnight as we all had to navigate a new normal, not knowing when it would end or if we would ever get back to a world that we recognized. But the one weekly routine that didn't change for us was getting ready for and observing Shabbat. Every Friday, I still got up early to bake challah. I still made the foods my family enjoys for Shabbat dinner and lunch. We still lit the candles when Shabbat came in and took comfort in the familiarity of our brachot and rituals. While we may not have had guests around the table, for those 25 hours we relaxed and gained strength from a time of rest that has always sustained us. At the time, I was in the process of getting my MFA in writing for children and young adults, and that particular semester, I was exclusively studying picture books, a challenge I would like to point out when you don't have access to your library. My advisor asked us to write a nonfiction manuscript, and Rising is the result of that assignment. I realized that I had something to say about this weekly ritual. Challah making isn't just about the mixing together of ingredients. I poured into the poetry all my gratitude for my family, community, and my faith in sustaining me through a time of great upheaval. I could never have known that the book would come out at another devastating and chaotic time for our community. But I've been honored to hear from so many families about how much this book means to them right now. At a recent PJ Library event, a mother told me her 4-year-old daughter has insisted that they read the book every day since they received it in June. The 4-year-old now reads it to her parents. Another mother told me she sent it off with her grown son, who's made Aliyah and is now a lone soldier in Israel. It brings me great comfort to know that others are finding comfort in my words. But a picture book only succeeds because of the magic that is the collaboration between illustrations and text on the page. Sophia Vincent Guy's brilliant illustrations brought this story to life. Tiffany, you can share the slides that show Sophia's. I particularly love how she plays with light and shadow on the page, as well as how she leans into the Jewish joy. You can show the next one. Thank you. And the one after. Thank you. I could not be more grateful that our publisher paired us together. This is as much her book as it is mine. I would now like to share with you a video Sophia sent for the occasion.
Hello, I'm Sophia Vincent Guy. I'm the illustrator of Sidora Ludwig's book, Rising. Thank you so much for honoring Rising with the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Children. Both Sidora and I are so excited that Rising is getting recognized and appreciated. When I received the manuscript for Rising, I knew immediately that I wanted to illustrate it. It was such a warm and inviting book, and I loved the pace of it. I just thought it was lovely. And I began by really thinking about the spaces, the warmth of the spaces, the color palettes, and the quality of light that was coming in. I really wanted the light to be another kind of character in the book. The illustrations are all meticulously hand-drawn inside of Photoshop and also outside of the computer with traditional materials like watercolor and gouache. I love the process of making it. It was such a joy. I'm so grateful to Candlewick Press for bringing me into the project and for the art direction of Amy Berniker, and also for the lovely words of Sidora. Her book was just really inspiring to draw. And also to my agent, Danielle Svetkov. I'm so grateful to all the readers also who have been enjoying it and making it a part of their bedtime routine with their children. That is just such a gift to watch people enjoying the story and resonating with it. So I'm sending you so much gratitude from across the seas and all my very, very best. Thank you.
Thank you to my editor, Mary Lee Donovan, and the entire team at Candlewick Press, also to my agent, Jackie Lipton. Thank you to all of you here for celebrating with us today, and may we always find joy in sharing the stories that make up who we are as a Jewish people.
Hi, I'm Sandra Rabinovich, and I'm pleased to present this year's Canadian Jewish Literary Award in Fiction to Harriet Alida Lai. Her novel, Let It Destroy You, is her second novel. She's also published a memoir and a children's book, along with print journalism and other projects. What stood out for the jury in this book was its graceful, subtle writing style and its interest in moral questions. It's a work of imagination based on a real-life figure, Leo Lizard, a Jewish Hungarian-born physicist and inventor who began his career in Germany, but with Hitler's rise to power, left for London, and then in 1938 escaped to the United States. Szilard himself was a complex man, concerned with the ethical issues relating to his role in the development of the atomic bomb. And the author creates a fictional scenario in which his work and values are put on trial literally. The novel also imagines the scientist's relationship with his wife, who was a Jewish physician born in Austria and accompanied him on his journey, sensitively sharing both points of view, and it offers poignant reflections on marriage and motherhood. It's a sophisticated and quietly powerful story. I'd like to invite Harriet Alida Lai up to receive her award.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give like a 1-minute speech and then a 4-minute reading. It is incredibly unlikely for a book to succeed in the world. I'm not sure if you know, but the odds are very much stacked against books. It is very hard for these little things to find their way and to find their readers. There are so many books, as I'm sure you know, and there are so many other things to do. So I would like to thank the very thoughtful and passionate team at the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards for shining a light on this book. It is a huge honor. And thank you hugely to my editor, Kelly Joseph, who's also here today, for helping me find my way as I wrote this book. To my partner, Cal, for his unwavering support as I spend so much of my time thinking about people I invented. And I would also like to thank my kids who inspire and ground me. My 6-year-old wanted to come today, but then he decided it would be more fun to play at home with the babysitter and with his little sister. But yeah, my kids inspire and ground me and rewrote my life. I would also like to thank my very dear family and friends, especially those who are here today, my mom, my dad, Ingrid, Katie, and Sarah Jane. Thank you, and thanks to everyone for reading. The readers are what make the book exist. As Sandra said, this is a dual perspective novel from husband and wife in 2 first-person voices, and I will be reading from near the very beginning in the voice of August. I know that what you're interested in is the bomb, but I can't tell you about that without telling you about everything that came before. I may as well start at the beginning. My mother had a way of loving us that didn't get in the way. Her love was something I never had to worry about. For all that I would give to bring her back, I am grateful she isn't here now to see what has become of me. I wouldn't be able to explain. My family's first home was an apartment in Pest. I was born shortly after the unification of the 3 parts of the city, but even then, it was still considered by most to be its own town. Pest, distinct from the bourgeois Buda. The city was beautiful, as if built piece by a benevolent God showing off. But I'd say it's more impressive to know that it was made not by a higher power, but with human hands. My city was full of beauty for its own sake. Ornate sculptures on the rounded corners of buildings at the turn of a corner, carved stone, brightly painted trams running up and down the streets for as long as people were awake, which was, it seemed to me as a child, forever. Looking up, one's view of the sky was interrupted with tram lines, street lamps, smoke. I had such love for it, a childlike love that was part admiration and part fear. Fear because it was so much bigger than me, and I was afraid it would reject me. Down by the river, where I wasn't allowed to walk by myself, the chain bridge to Buddha looked like stone giants standing knee-deep in the water, paths of metal running into their mouths. The oil lamps on the bridge glowed copper in the dusk. The fog absorbed the light as it rolled along the Danube. Or Danube, I always forget how to pronounce that. My father designed bridges, but not that one, so I could appreciate it differently, with mystical reverence, rather than trying to comprehend the mathematics of it. I held my mother's hand and I felt the glow, as if I were just another lamp becoming illuminated. I haven't seen my city or my mother since I left. Sometimes my longing for both gives me an ache that feels like heartbreak, and it knocks me down like a wave. For my 10th birthday, my father gave me a chemistry set, and it set off something inside of me. I read the little bound book that came in the box until I had memorized its contents. There were 4 different types of chemical reactions. 4, only 4, a whole world, and only 4 possibilities. What a relief to be able to trust in science to hone the vast chaos of this world into a predictable, specific outcome. With science, I was given a new language to describe a world that I'd always felt at least slightly at odds with. Scientists bring the invisible out of the formless and into something tangible, some sort of visible structure. We make diagrams of atoms, electrons. We make equations for speed, gravity. The experience of learning this new language was not unlike falling in love, but it's impossible for me to tell you about the fear that goes along with this kind of love. The invisible is always the hardest to believe in. Artists render the invisible also. Think of a sculptor making bodies emerge from stone as if discovering something that has always been there, or a writer who turns feelings into words on paper that you can see and hold and recognize. For many years, long before I began working on the bomb, I had a very clear vision of what lay at the heart of the atom. I could see it from the very first time I learned of atoms. If I'd been a painter, I would have brushed black at the periphery, gradually lightening the canvas to a bright core, a heart of radiant greenish gold. This vision consumed me. I saw it whenever I closed my eyes. It was vibrant. Vibrant shares a Latin root with vibrate, vibrare, meaning to set in tremulous motion, to move quickly to and fro. But the Latin comes from the Proto-Indo-European word, vipe, meaning to turn, to tremble ecstatically, wave, whip. We learn something about a culture that needs to describe things that tremble ecstatically. A fish freshly caught, a lover unsated, the heart of a flame. I can see it. We are all the same culture, after all. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Andrew Cohen, and I have the pleasure of presenting the Irving Abella Award in History. And just a word about Irving Abella, if you don't know about him. Irving Abella was a colossus in Canadian Jewry for as long as he lived, which was 82 years. He died 2 years ago. He is best known as an historian. Early on, he was known for his works on labor history, but more recently in his career, or later in his career, he turned to Jewish Canada. He wrote a history of the Jewish people in Canada called A Coat of Many Colors, and his magnum opus, None is Too Many, a story of Canada's restrictive immigration policies between 1939 and 1945. Ichi, as his friends called him, lived and breathed things Jewish. It was his oxygen. I knew no one who could rhapsodize about chopped liver and challah the way Ichi could. And Rosie Abella, who wanted to be here tonight, his wife of 52 years, would say that at the end of the day, chopped liver and challah got the better of Ichi. But this award was established a year ago. We are very grateful, Edward has already mentioned them, to the friends of Ichi Abella for establishing the award that is the only named award of the many we are going to present today. This year, the Irving Abella Award in History goes to Michael Cater for the book After the Nazis, The Story of Culture in West Germany. After the Nazis is a sweeping cultural history from 1945 to 1990 of West Germany. It is original, erudite, and comprehensive, a study of the literature, theater, art, music, cinema, journalism, radio and television of West Germany, as it tried to extinguish the ghosts of Nazism, the Third Reich. At heart is the question, how do a people move beyond the murderous horrors of Nazism to modern liberal democracy? Michael Cater, who is the distinguished research professor emeritus at York University, has spent his entire career, really, examining 20th century Germany. He offers his answer in the novels of Günter Grass, the composer Hans Werner Hans, and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, the filmmakers Wim Wenders and Rainer Werner Fassbinder, among others. This is an important, timely book. As today's far-right revisionists try to erase the past and minimize the Holocaust, Professor Cater ably shows us the power of the arts in post-war Germany to discredit and dismantle the stubborn falsehoods and claims of victimization, which were quite well established in West Germany after the war. So unfortunately, Professor Cater cannot be with us today, as we heard earlier. He is 87 years old. He has had 2 surgeries. He's unable to come. So my job, I'm told, is to hold up the certificate and pretend I'm receiving it. This is it here. And then, and then to say, cue the video, which means he'll speak to you from an award ceremony of 7 years ago, I think, in which he was also honored.
Thank you to the foundation and the awards committee. I'm honored to be here today. My book is about how the Nazis tried to set up their own culture in order to penetrate Germans' minds. Much of this, of course, would have to do with anti-Semitism. But in order to set up their own culture, they had to destroy the old culture, much of which went back to the Weimar Republic and before that. Now, what to do with the Jews who were still in Germany? Well, they were put into a Kulturbund, a Jüdischer Kulturbund, a Jewish culture league, and here they could try and see what they might do with their own songs and so on and so forth. Well, the idea was to ghettoize them and then have them ready for shipment to the camps during the war. The Culture League was destroyed in 1941, and all the Jews were dispersed. Now, a few Jews managed to remain outside the Culture League and more or less ply their own ways, their own culture, including one of the forbidden fruits in Nazi Germany, and that was jazz, because it was invented by the Negroes and honed by the Jews, all right? One of the characters who still remained playing jazz was Heinz Schumann, whose very short story I shall relate, Heinz Coco Schumann, whom I met in Berlin in the late 1980s when he was back there from Auschwitz. He died about 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, at the age of 97. Schumann's father, Alfred, was an Aryan, a carpenter with a World War I record who converted to Judaism for the sake of his Jewish wife, Hedwig. Her father, Louis Rotholz, was the proprietor of a beauty salon in Berlin's Scheinenviertel, the barnyard quarter, where the poverty-stricken Jews lived, many Orthodox and originally hailing from the European East. Coco, born in 1924, grew up in a Mosaic faith in the Scheinenviertel. He characterizes it in his memoirs, which have now come out. The barnyard quarter had a prickly atmosphere for roaming around. It was a poor but lively place where everyone had to see how he would get through the day. Immediately after Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night, the terrible pogrom of November 9, 10, and 1938, Coco tried his skill at his uncle's drum set, which he had left behind after fleeing from his hair salon on Alte Schönhauser Straße. Inspired by the legendary Weintraub Syncopators, the Weimar Republic most hailed jazz group, and all of them were Jewish, by 1940, Coco was servicing several of the clubs open for Wehrmacht soldiers around the Kurfürstendamm, Berlin's big drag, in various combos, casually switching to guitar. Jazz was neither officially forbidden nor expressly permitted. It was silently tolerated due to the popular demand and for the sake of the armed forces' morale. Paradox here. By September 1941, Coco was compelled to wear the Yellow Star of David because he had celebrated Bar Mitzvah and because both his parents were counted as Jews, but he surreptitiously put it in his pocket. My blue eyes and Berlin wise guy talk did not fit the stereotype of the typical Jew, so he reminisces. After Goebbels' proclamation of total war in February 1943, the SS conducted a raid on Rosita Bar, Coco's gig, looking for deserters and miners. An SS man stood at the bandstand, clapping his hands in enthusiasm. This brought out the devil in Coco. I stood up and said, actually, you have to arrest me. The SS man looked bewildered. Why? Well, I'm a Jew. I'm playing swing and I'm a miner. He laughed out loud and could not stop laughing at the stupendous joke. The entire bar roared with them. However, in March of 1943, Coco Schumann was accused of failing to wear the Star of David, performing forbidden music, and seducing Aryan women. He was sent to Theresienstadt, about which we have just heard, and from there to Auschwitz. There he survived because at the selection ramp, the SS camp physician Joseph Mengele had chosen him for a work detail as a plumber. Yet he ended up playing a guitar left behind by condemned gypsies in one of the bands put together for the pleasure of the SS. On April 30th, 1945, the day of Hitler's suicide, Coco Schumann and a few other musicians who had survived, after a harrowing death march, found themselves in Bavarian Wolfratshausen just before their final liberation by the Americans. Music had saved his life. Thank you.
My name is Mark Fryman, and I'm here to present the Canadian Jewish Literary Award in Biography, Memoir category to Jill Culiner. Jill flew in from rural France to be with us today. Her book, Those Absent from the Great Hungarian Plain, is a masterpiece, in my humble opinion. In it, she presents vignettes from what was planned to be a brief excursion to find traces of Jewish presence in rural Hungary, a brief excursion that turned into a multi-year sojourn. And these vignettes explore memory, culture, and hard truths about what can lie beneath the surface in the human heart. Those absent in the title are, of course, the Jews. And fittingly, they are also, right up until the end, also absent from this story. The event that the author chooses to epitomize their final disappearance from rural Hungary and from the Great Hungarian Plain is the pogrom in the town of Kunmadaras in 1946, in which Holocaust survivors who had returned to that town were attacked by an organized mob, leaving several dead and numerous injured, while the police stood by and declined to intervene. This story of absence is told through vivid, sympathetic, often humorous and indeed hilarious, but ultimately unsparing portraits of present-day inhabitants in that town who, at least at first, claim to have forgotten that there ever were any Jews living there, let alone that their town had hosted a pogrom. The book may be about Hungary, but its current, wider relevance will be clearly obvious. It is also, as I think we will soon hear, a great read.
Thank you very much, Mark. And thank you all for being here. Good afternoon. When I was living in Hungary, it was near the end, and the town of Kartság invited Avram Hershko to accept an award from the city of Kartság, because he was born in Kartság, he was Jewish, and he had just won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry. Hershko, who was now living in Israel, showed up. There was the presentation in a very formal room. The mayor sat there. He was very, very proud to be presenting a local man who had won the Nobel Prize. The mayor was a noted anti-Semite. With him were all of his lackeys. They were also anti-Semites. And Hershko said that he needed a translator. He refused to speak in Hungarian. He spoke only in Hebrew. And so his translator sat beside him, and what his speech was, basically, was that, thank you for the award, but I owe absolutely nothing to Hungary or to the Hungarian culture. All I owe to Israel. That evening, there was a big reception in a building that looked very, very, very shabby. But it was the first time I'd ever been inside, and we walked through the door, and there was a double staircase going up to the top, and a ballroom that dated from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was magnificent. And I saw Hershko, and I sort of walked around behind him and heard him speaking absolutely fluent Hungarian. I can understand why he denies any Hungarian existence. He left in 1950. And in 1950, Jews were being persecuted by the communist government. They were singled out for persecution. And we must remember, I think, that the Hungarian government, the communist government, that singled out Jews were composed of Rákosi, who was the leader. He was the party leader of the Communist Party, but his real name was Matthias Rosenfeld, and he was the son of a village grocer. And he built a little cult around himself, told folksy peasants' parables, and he used anti-Semitic remarks. And at his side were other people. There was Benjamin Eisenberger, a Jewish tailor, who became the head of the State Security Department. There was the KGB agent Erno Singer. His father had been a banker, and he was the Communist Party secretary. He was known as the Butcher of Barcelona for his purge of Trotskyist groups. There was also Heman Lowy, the Minister of Defense, and Joseph Lederer, Minister of Culture. In other words, Jews against Jews. This wasn't the first time it happened. It also happened during the very brief 9-month communist rule after the First World War, when Bela Kun, a Jew, persecuted Jews particularly. Now, as Mark said, I arrived in Hungary to take photos, and when I learned that there had been a pogrom in Kunmadahash, I decided I would go there and investigate. What did people say about a pogrom now? There were pogroms throughout Europe after the war, all of them in 1946. There were pogroms in Ukraine, in Romania. The worst was in Kielce in Poland, which you might know about, where 43 Jews were beaten to death. The excuse was used that they had kidnapped a Christian child and used its blood in ritual. And apparently this was the same thing with the pogrom in Kunmadahash. Now, I didn't speak any Hungarian, so I don't know how I imagined I was going to get to the truth of this story, but I have noticed throughout my life that being a Canadian Jew has great advantages. People don't feel threatened by Canadians. We're sort of schlubs, you know, we're not aggressive. We're not like the Americans, we don't throw bombs at anybody. We do persecute the French Canadians, that's true. But other than that, we're sort of nice guys. The Jewish part is a bit trickier. We own the World Bank and we control the world press, but sometimes we can be forgiven. Oh, and I found out quite recently from a very nice person who wrote to my publisher and said, one of my publishers, and said that, why publish me? I come from one of the wealthiest families in Canada, and I own Air Canada. And this is wonderful news. Because being a Canadian Jew has this non-threatening advantage, you do get people who tell you very strange things and you don't necessarily want to hear them. And not only that, often you can't believe that you're hearing them. I did have a very nice German lady who told me that she also had suffered during the war. She'd lost some of her furniture and she almost lost her house. Another German lady wanted to explain to me why it was necessary to have the concentration camps. There were so many Jews in Germany, she said, and then when we went into Poland, there were more. What could we do with them all? Very charming, I was asked to chauffeur a very charming man, a Baron von Plato, who wanted to, he was with a painting group in France, and he didn't want to go to Dijon. And I was asked to chauffeur him back to his hotel because he didn't want to be with the rest. And while I drove him, knowing he knew that I was Jewish, he decided he had to make a confession. He didn't want to go to Dijon because as an SS officer during the war, he had been responsible for a massacre there. He said it was the excess of youth. When I got to Kunmadarash, as Mark pointed out, people either didn't know that a pogrom had taken place, or they denied it, or they said it was carried out by the Germans. I said there were no Germans here in 1946. Well, then it was the Russians. But it wasn't us. The Hungarians, like many other countries, don't want to accept necessarily guilt for the Holocaust. They see themselves as victims. They were victims of the Ottomans because the Ottomans came in and took over the country. Then they were the victims of Austrians. Then they were the victims of Russia, of the Soviets. So they prefer victim status, and victims can't carry out crimes. However, in 1944, it was near the end of the war, the Germans were obviously losing, and the Jews of Hungary were until then safe, more or less. Many had been, men had been sent to the front and been killed. They were sent as cattle fodder. But the communities were still intact, and the Germans knew that without cooperation from the Hungarian government, there was no way they could liquidate the community, because Jews were important people. They were doctors, they were lawyers, they were journalists, many had been ennobled in the 19th century. However, the Hungarian government saw the great advantage in liquidating Jewish assets, real estate, livestock, banks, businesses, jewels, houses, everything. And so they heartily agreed to the deportation of the first 440,000 Jews to Auschwitz, starting in May 1944, late in the war. I decided I would settle in the area to get more information, and I moved into a town called Tisza Őrs. Tisza Őrs is outside of Great Cumania. Kunmadarash is in Great Cumania, an area. And this area was forbidden to Jews under the Empress Maria Theresa. Jews lived in all the areas surrounding Great Cumania. They lived in the small villages. They had been, as we know, invited by the nobles to live on the estates and to trade in the goods produced by the estates. So many of the Jews were peddlers. And they would live in these villages outside of Great Cumania. During the day, they would come in with their goods to Great Cumania, trade, and by nightfall, they would return to their villages. So I knew that the village I was living in, Tisza Őrs, had Jews. But when I asked about the Jews, no, Jews never lived here, not here, in the next village, or down the road, but never here, never. The society was a very intriguing mix at that time. It doesn't exist anymore. It was the tail end. There were communists, there were people who had belonged to the secret police, who had tortured peasants, who had murdered peasants. There were peasants whose families had been victims to these, and they were all neighbors. There were Germans, some of whom had belonged to the Hitler Youth movement. There were gypsies, and there were people who were black market traders who had traded with the Russians. So it was a fascinating mix. There were also nobles who had lost all of their land. So you can imagine the kinds of stories one could get, the kinds of things you can hear. But I imagine they were terribly cautious with each other. A strange situation. Now, not only did they deny that there were Jews, people also denied that there were gypsies. There were gypsies all over the place. There were gypsies living 4 doors down from me. There were gypsies living on the main road. No, there are no gypsies in this town. So gypsies were invisible like Jews. I have noticed that Jews can be invisible all over Eastern Europe. I've been in towns where there was a huge synagogue smack in the middle of town, and people said, no, there were never any Jews here. Huge synagogues. And I've found this so many times. So when Jews become visible is when you can make money with tourism, with heritage tourism, or if you want to show people the graveyard and make a little money, then Jews become visible, but otherwise we're invisible. Because I started making inquiries, I ran into some funny situations. For example, I met the last Jew living in the town of Tisza Őrs, that was some 10 or 15 kilometers away. Her name is Agnes Sego, Dr. Agnes Sego, and she's responsible for a charity that keeps the Jewish cemetery in order and for Jewish cultural events. Walking through the streets together, she brought to life those absent, Jewish merchants, the rabbis, the lawyers. In 1877, 1/3 of those in the Fire Brigade Association were Jewish. The Jewish Women's Association, created in 1883 and still in existence in 1941, organized balls, theatrical and musical productions, and used the profits to help the sick, supply underprivileged children with winter clothing and school equipment, and collect dowries for girls from impoverished families. Any trace of Jewish businesses, the tailors, the shoemakers, the grocery, the watchmaker, the bank, and the inns, is gone. Only the large synagogue building remains. It had become an electrical appliance outlet. They tried to destroy it, said Agnes, but it's so solid it couldn't be pulled down. After Agnes returned to work, it started raining. I took refuge in a nearby kochma, a bar, with an old-fashioned display window filled with potted plants. The barmaid was hostile. The room was unattractive and chilly, but I had an hour to wait until the bus left. Ordering a coffee, I pulled out a book. The owner, a thin man with a toothbrush mustache, came out from the back and threw open the front door. The few customers, serious male drinkers, protested. The room was cold enough, someone said. The owner sniggered. It's because of the smell in the room. Smoke from his smoldering cigar drifted into the air, and he launched into a droning monologue. Used to not understanding long-winded and often dull conversations in Hungarian, I blocked out his voice. It was only noxious background noise, but the words began untangling themselves. Hitler can come back any time he wants. He didn't finish the job. Got rid of most of the Jews, but left too many gypsies too. He can come back, finish them all off. Jews never learnt their lesson, charging twice as much as anyone else, exploiting us. The men on the benches grunted. I looked up. The owner was watching me and smirking. He knew who I was, and I was the smell he was referring to. So my Hungarian had improved after all. Thank you. A film was made about the pogrom in 1944. It was shown also that approximately 30% of Hungarians still believe that Jews need blood in ritual, in Jewish ritual. Some of my friends asked me, why did we really need this? The pogrom started when they said that a Christian child had been kidnapped, and then his blood used, and people went on the rampage. The real reason for the pogrom was that people were asked to give back the goods they had pillaged from Jewish houses during the war. One woman who was being beaten, the woman who was beating her was screaming, "This is for the quilt." In the end, the right wing used as an excuse for the pogrom, the right wing said that it was to assure that Soviet agents would take over the area for Soviet power. And the people on the left said that it was the right wing, the fascists, who were trying to ruin the new communist democracy. My photo exhibition about the vanished Jews of Eastern Europe, with a Hungarian edition, came to the museum in Tiszafüred. And once it came, I received quite a bit of press, the newspapers came, I was on television. And because of that, suddenly Jews started appearing. My neighbors came to me because I was on television. We saw you on television. And you know, Jews used to live 2 streets over. We can show you the house. And the house where Brigitte, the German, lives, that was a Jewish house. And that was a Jewish bar. And the pharmacy was once a Jewish pharmacy. So it was suddenly very acceptable to have known Jews and admit that they were there. Today in Hungary, the Jews who live there feel comfortable and uncomfortable. Orban is a horrible man, and he's an anti-Semite, but at the same time, he has forbidden any pro-Palestinian demonstrations, because he says that terrorism is indefensible. So therefore, the Jews, they say, look, the Hungarians, they don't like us, but at least we're left alone. I would like to read just a word that Orban said, if anybody has any doubts as to how he feels. And it sounds very, very familiar. He said, "This is our homeland, this is our life. We have no other. We must fight against an opponent that is different from us. Their faces are not visible, but are hidden from view. They do not fight directly, but by stealth. They are not honorable, but unprincipled. They are not national, but international. They do not believe in work, but speculate with money. They have no homeland, but feel that the whole world is theirs. They are not generous, but vengeful." These are the usual anti-Semitic words that we've been hearing for centuries. Basically, that's it, but I would like to add just one little anecdote to explain what life is like in Hungary. At one point, Agnes Sego said that she wanted to show me something quite surprising. It was a little park, and in the little park there were 2 Jewish tombstones. Did I want to see it? Now, of course I did. So we went to the little park in Tiszafüred, and we began looking for the tombstones, and they were no longer there. But there was a man, a worker, with a wheelbarrow, and he was cementing up a wall. So we went over to him and we asked about the tombstones. And he said, yes, well, the school director over there, he told us to knock them down and use the stones to build the wall. Which was, we were quite horrified. And I said, well, I want to go ask the school director. And Agnes said, don't do that. He's a dangerous man. He's politically important. We can't do that. He really is dangerous. And I said, no, this is unacceptable. People can't just go knocking down Jewish tombstones. So what we did was, we called a friend of ours Steve, in Budapest, and he was a very difficult man. He ran schools and summer camps for Jewish children. He was the son of Holocaust survivors. And a real fighter. And he sent out journalists from a newspaper called The Sun, which no longer exists, one of the papers that Orban has closed down, like many. And the reporters from The Sun showed up, and they said to Agnes that she should go away because she was a librarian in town, and she could be in trouble if she was included in the story. They asked me to meet them and to show where the gravestones had been. So I showed them. And there was the same man still cementing the wall. And they went over to him and they asked about the tombstones. He was extremely hostile. He said, I never heard of any tombstones, I never saw them. The journalist then went to the school to meet the director, and he refused to meet them. There were children playing in the schoolyard, and they went to the children in the schoolyard and asked if they had seen the tombstones. They weren't far away. They were just like the back of this room. No, we never saw them. And they became very hostile and very aggressive as well. They went back to see the director of the school, and the director of the school, meantime, had snuck out the back door and had gone to see the mayor of the town. When the journalist went to see the mayor of the town, the school director snuck out of the back door of the town hall, and the next thing we knew, he had gone on holiday. There was absolutely no way to find out anything, so I suggested we call a local historian who was very well known. We went to see him. He said he would investigate, to come back several hours later. We did. And he said he would talk to the journalists only if his name was not mentioned, if they turned off their tape recorders and put away their cameras. This is supposedly a democratic country in the European Union. And they agreed. The two tombstones belonged to a couple that had lived there in a little house that no longer existed. He was Jewish and she was Christian. And they requested that when they died, they be buried there on the grounds, because he would have been buried in the Jewish cemetery, and she would have been buried in the Christian cemetery. And the two of them wanted to stay together for all eternity. And that was the story. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the jurors. Thank you to Robin Roger, who saw an early version of this manuscript and encouraged me. Thank you to Eva Samary, who gave me all the information about rural Hungary. She made rural Hungary pre-Holocaust come alive for me. Thanks to Melda Cederbaum, who has kept me in touch with the Toronto Jewish community. And thanks to Claret Press and Katie Isbester, who couldn't be here today, who's my publisher, and Alex Green. And again, thank you so much to the jurors. I can't begin to tell you how much this award means to me. Thanks.
My name is Alain Goldschläger, and I'm here to present the award for Jewish thought and culture to Elena Wolf for her brilliant book, Faithfully Seeking Friends. Unfortunately, Elena couldn't be here. She's in Israel, and she couldn't change her flight because for the moment in Israel, only El Al can fly, and so changing a ticket is totally out of the question. But we are lucky to have a son and a video to speak about this. The book, Faithfully Seeking Friends, could be summarized and typified by the first word, which is faithfully. Because here we have a faith of the author at discovering more about Kafka. And she devoted years at trying to retrace the parkour of Kafka, and in the process discover a lot of little fact, interpretation, and details. And for a faithful reader of Kafka, it's a tremendous opportunity to learn not only about the man, but also about the mind of that man, which was kind of a strange one, and which discovers so many new facets for whom I wish to analyze them a little bit. But there is something else which makes this book so appealing. Doing this research, as so many scholars have done for Kafka or some other authors, in this case, and that makes the book so exceptional, we have also a research of the author for herself, guided by Kafka. And so what we have in this book is basically two pilgrimages. The one of Kafka, which is discovered or enlightened, but we have also the progress of knowledge of Kafka and of herself, of Elena. And the book describes this intertwined two stories, two pilgrimages and discoveries. So I will now invite the son of Elena, Naum, to come, bring some word from her, and we will see a video. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to stand in for my mother today and receive on her behalf this esteemed Canadian Jewish Literary Award for her Kafka Quest book, Faithfully Seeking Friends. Of course, it would have been better all around if my mother would have been here today to receive the award herself. But she and my father are in Tel Aviv, where they have been celebrating the high holidays and Sukkot with my sister, brother-in-law, nieces, nephews, family, and friends. My parents, like all Israelis and visitors to Israel, are in an active war situation. My parents were also in Tel Aviv on October the 7th, 2023, at the time of the Hamas attacks. The release of Faithfully Seeking Friends coincided with the start of the war, and the enthusiasm that my mother would have felt upon the publication of the book, years in the works, was zapped, understandably. The war is not over, but we stand firm wherever we are and must prevail. This award in the category of Jewish thought and culture is a bright beacon and wonderful recognition of my mother's work on an iconic modernist Jewish author. As my mother has often said, the journey and the work are not over. Thank you.
Faithfully Seeking Friends is the fruit of many years of reading, writing, mulling, struggling, and questing. I came to Prague modernist author Franz Kafka as an angsty teen, journeying on my own into the world by way of world literature. Kafka got into my head with the Metamorphosis, the mind-bending transformational story of Gregor Samsa, dependable son, brother, employee, and family champion who wakes up one morning in the body of a giant bug. A story based on a fantastical premise, soberly told and somehow, to me, seamlessly real. A protagonist troubled and troubling, yet eminently compelling, an inside-outsider I could relate to. I fell hard for a fictional quasi-hero and his creator. He's never really left me. Kafka has come right up through the center of my life. I pursued him first in his fiction, in translations from German of his stories, his 3 fragmentary novels, America, or The Man Who Disappeared, The Trial, The Castle, then in his diaries, notebooks, aphorisms, and extensive correspondence. His fictional themes of guilt, shame, strangeness, alienation, power, and contrary longing, never very far from his biographical experience. When my own life permitted, almost 15 years ago, I began tracking him in the field, M, my helpmate and foil, seeking his traces in places he lived, worked, vacationed, and convalesced, where he died and where he was laid to rest. Guided by his writing and by hints, hunches, and indications along the way. open to being surprised by what might be just off-road, under a bridge, across a meadow, or down a hall, affirmed by synchronicities and felt connections, disappointed by glitches. Yet even glitches, letdowns, and absences have intimated the company of K. Kafka's is a canny spirit with a frequently capricious sense of humor. Faithfully Seeking Franz reflects my engagement with Kafka's writing and life over the course of many of my own life phases and writing stages. I'm often asked what it is about Kafka that intrigued and continues to intrigue me. I suppose the intrigue has morphed over the years as I myself have morphed. If, however, I have to distill my sustained interest in Kafka down to a few key factors, I would say that Kafka, who wrangled throughout his life with a sense of personhood, relationship to humanity, Jewishness, and connection to Zionism, has impelled me to explore corners and rooms in my own sense of self, alongside ruptures in general existence. And in his singularly lucid yet sliding, often enigmatic language that stokes thought and feeling while eluding pat interpretation, I have found inspiration, guidance, prescience, and even hope. I often go to Kafka to lie on his writerly chest, to paraphrase what he once wrote in his diary of Swedish author August Strindberg, quote, "I am not reading him to read him, but to lie on his breast. He holds me on his left arm like a child. 10 times I almost slip off, but at the 11th attempt, I sit there firmly, feel secure, and have a wide view," end quote. Kafka offers inexhaustible possibilities for connecting and for making sense of the world. In 1903, at the tender age of 20, he famously wrote to his school friend Oscar Pollock, "A book must be the axe for breaking the frozen sea inside us." Kafka provides a metaphorical axe if we take it up and do the work, though the work is never finished. I extend my deepest thanks to the jurors of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards for choosing Faithfully Seeking Franz as the recipient of the 2024 award in the category of Jewish Thought and Culture. It's a distinct honor to have my book recognized in this way, especially this year, the centenary of Franz Kafka's death. A kind of acknowledgement too to the enduring potency of Kafka's oeuvre and the significance of his writing and life for our times. Deep thanks as well to my Guernica Editions publishers, Michael Marola, Connie Butsu McParland, and Anna Van Valkenburg, for their continuing faith in my work overall and for standing behind Faithfully Seeking Franz in particular. This award would not have been possible without the signal support of Guernica, nor would it have been possible in a more fundamental sense without the constancy, love, and many talents of my husband Menachem, my first reader and intrepid partner M on the quest. Writing may be a solitary endeavor, but no one writes in a vacuum, and no one who writes is ever entirely alone. In writing, we are in communion with ourselves, our language, our subjects, the potential reader or listener, and with the mystery of the creative force field itself. The gratitude is great, and the quest continues. To quote Rabbi Tarfon's saying from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, "You are not required to complete the work, neither are you free to desist from it." Franz Kafka never permitted himself to be free of desisting from the work. Neither did he feel required to complete it. He may well have taken Rabbi Tarfon's words to heart.
Hello again. I'm Edward Trapunski. I'm not Anna Porter, who is going to present this award to Rhea Tregebov for Talking to Strangers, which is the winner of the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Poetry. Book is terrific. Rhea is definitely one of our best poets in this generation. We're all strangers in the starting life of midnight is the opening line from her poem, White Nights, and it echoes the title of this new lyrical collection of Rhea Trebegov's poetry. The eighth book, this is her eighth book of poetry, confirms her place among the most significant poets of her generation. Her Jewish heritage informs refuah, which is Hebrew for healing, and especially Kaddish, Villanelle, her lyrical approach to the Hebrew prayer for her dead father. Even with the lament of talking to strangers, she ends hopefully with a final poem proclaiming Hineni, I am here. And here is Rhea Tregebov.
It might seem almost redundant to thank the jury yet again, but I have to say this is one of the most gracious and one of the most generous awards that I've had the great fortune to be included among, and I really want to thank everyone. I know how much work it is to be on this kind of jury, and we've just been treated beautifully, and I really am very appreciative. I did want to read 3 poems from the book. There is a section in the book called Talking to Strangers that is nonfiction. It began one poem at a time, but I found myself encountering strangers and bemused and moved by the intimacy that would suddenly arise from these encounters. And we judge people at a distance, and I'm lucky to have my Toronto family here today, and they probably know just how harshly I judge people at a distance and closely, but I found in these poems and in the conversations I was able to have that somehow these strangers transfigured into people that we could understand, and the dehumanization that is so easy ebbed. This one is in the series, and it's called Talk, IDF. Each of these poems has a place and a time, and this is Tel Aviv to Haifa, March 2018. At the station, the world's smallest soldier gives up her seat for me on the slow train to Haifa. Other than thank you, I don't know what to say. All the long way she leans against the baggage rack, her head not grazing its railing. Jostled, scrolling her phone, watching American cooking shows in miniature. She looks good in khaki. You wouldn't think they made uniforms that size, but it fits. The Uzi, rate of fire 600 rounds per minute, fits too. All the young soldiers look at home with their fresh weapons, knapsacks. As we near Haifa, I thank her again, 2 hours on her feet instead of me. She tells me it's her job. It's a soldier's job to give up seats to older women on trains, to admonish others in strict Hebrew to give up theirs. She's from New Jersey, she says, been here 2 years. Didn't know a word of Hebrew. She's a volunteer. Isn't it hard in combat not knowing the language well? In combat, it isn't hard. You just go where the others go, do what they do. She was in Nablus. It was rough. They're letting her out early. She'll stay in Haifa, she says, find a place to live. Her hand steady on the Uzi. And I'll read two more poems from the book. There's a section in the book of love poems. And my partner, Sam, is a child of Holocaust survivors. And we know how long that legacy lingers. So this poem is for Sam. It's called Second Generation. You want to keep everything. Obsolete, dust-encrusted, plastic-wrapped, blank mini cassettes for the defunct video camera that caught the kids' lives. Vacant jewel cases that don't hold any of the music you don't play. To save everything. The tin can long parted from its label that might hold something good. The 80s sweatshirt, fluorescent logo resting flake by plastic flake into cipher. To keep everything you never had. That real live monkey orphaned in its teacup, the back pages of the comic book offered for the little you couldn't afford. Just one glance from the girl practicing flute in the girls' bathroom, its lonesome tones not for you. To save everything the war took. Your father's mother, his father side by side. Her lace collar, white blouse pressed, his suit solemn, dark. Unknowable uncles, aunts, cousins, their faces in photos on no wall. And this one is called Refuah. This is also for Sam. The first time you kissed me, an even dozen years ago in your beautiful house overlooking the garden, the water, the mountains, and held me, a grown woman who had traveled to where I found you, mostly past hope. I laid my head against your chest and said, "You feel like home." And when I said home, I must have thought of places I knew. My last city, where in the bustle, every call has its response. Or the place I grew up in, prairie that might welcome anyone. But perhaps home to you is ancestral, the land of Israel, a place of milk and honey, olive groves, the land we're traveling in, where I keep asking what words mean, and you keep knowing. Israel, which is also Palestine, a land fractured, the land maybe where you live, where there is always war. Home, where you stay armed and ready, because you come from a hard place I never lived, where I live sometimes with you. I ask if refuah in Hebrew means remedy, and you tell me healing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rhea. Now, it means so much to me to present the Canadian Jewish Literary Award in Yiddish to In the Land of the Postscript, the complete short stories of Chava Rosenfarb, which was translated by her daughter, Goldie Morgentaler. This is the first time that a complete selection of Chava Rosenfarb's short stories is available in English. The postscript in the title refers to the afterlife of Holocaust survivors in Montreal. The stories hit really close to home for me. My parents were survivors who settled in Montreal after the Shoah. My father was from Vilna and a stark Yiddishist. My mother was English and didn't speak a word of Yiddish when they escaped from the Nazis in France. When my family arrived in Montreal, they joined a vibrant Yiddish community, and my mother took Yiddish lessons from Chava Rosenfarb to be able to be part of her new life. For my father, the new life was a love of Yiddish books, which I've inherited from him. In 1954, as a leader with the Yiddish Volksbibliothek and the Vilna Verein, he invited Chaim Grada to Montreal to speak. He invited all the Montreal Yiddish writers to welcome Grada, including Chava Rosenfarb. It was recorded. And if you want to hear Chava Rosenfarb's beautiful Yiddish and my father's, check it out on the Yiddish Book Center's website. It's there. The award goes to the translator, Chava Rosenfarb's daughter. Goldie Morgentaler started translating her mother's work at the age of 13. Translation is an art. Goldie is a professor emerita of English literature at the University of Lethbridge and her mother's literary champion. And she has singular access and insight into the author, her language, and the intricacies of transforming the Yiddish sentences into English, while maintaining the intense emotions and experiences they convey. The book is a masterpiece, and here's Goldie.
Can you hear me now? Koidem kol will ich danken dem Chava Edward Chapunski und die alle Mitglieder von der Kanada Jiddischer Bücherjury, was haben mir belohnt die dosige literarische Prämie. Es ist bei mir ein größer Kuvert. Ich wollte euch gewollt danken, White Goat Press, der Verlager von Chava Rosenfarbs Erzählungen. Die Prämie, was ich bekomme heint, ist eine Prämie für Übersetzen von Jiddisch auf Englisch, will ich tage sagen, ein paar Wörter legabe Übersetzung, weil das ist eine von den literarischen Unternehmungen, was bekommt nicht keine Sache der Herz und Anerkennung. Also wie meine Zeit zu reden ist aber begrenzte, hoffe ich, dass ihr werdet mir möglich sein, was ich will jetzt rübergehen auf Englisch. I would like to thank Edward Chabunsky and the other judges of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards for the honor they confer on me today. I find it particularly moving that I'm receiving this award as a translator of my own mother's work into English. My mother was, as you heard, the Yiddish novelist, poet, and short story writer, Chava Rosenfarb. In the Land of the Postscript is the title of a collection of Chava's short stories. The stories deal with the afterlives of Holocaust survivors in Montreal, where Chava lived for most of her life. Thus, Canada is, as the title suggests, the land of the Postscript, where the survivors of the Holocaust, like Chava herself, lived out the remainder of their lives. The stories in the collection were originally published in Yiddish, so I am particularly grateful to the committee for singling out translation for this award. Translation has traditionally been the unloved stepchild in the field of literary activity. And yet, because no reader can possibly know every language, translation opens up the world and makes possible interactions with the world's writers, not just those whose languages we know. But while it serves as a bridge between cultures, translation is especially important for the preservation of languages like Yiddish that have lost most of their speakers and are only accessible to a limited number of readers. It has been the particular tragedy of writers in Yiddish that not only has their readership diminished, but their own children and grandchildren often cannot read their work. Translation is thus the only means of rescue. My mother, Chava Rosenfarb, wrote 3 multi-volume novels, many short stories and essays, and published 4 books of poetry. Yet without translation, most of these works, the product of her lifetime as a writer, would be lost. Translation, some of which she did herself, was her lifeline. It was her literary future. There is a saying that things get lost in translation. There is some truth to that, but things also get found. The greater truth is that without translation, some things would get totally, irredeemably lost. Translation is the most optimistic of literary endeavors because it suggests that everything may be transposed. Even idioms and phrases and sayings that have no equivalent in other languages can, in one approximation or another, be somehow transmuted so that those who speak an entirely different language and belong to an entirely different culture may nevertheless understand each other through the medium of translation. I've often been asked, what are the hardest things to convey when going from Yiddish to English? I would say that it is the emotionality of the language. Yiddish is a language of overstatement, of highly charged emotion. Translated into English, this kind of emotion sometimes appears overwrought, too much of a good thing, too sentimental. For instance, English frowns on redundancy. Yiddish thrives on it. Nobody ever cries, just cries in Yiddish. They cry with tears, they cry out their eyes, they cry so that a ship, so as to sink a ship with sour milk. Curses are never short and cutting in Yiddish. They are long, involved, and often very funny. The curse is deliberately made fantastical because it is never meant to come true. So, for instance, I'll just give you one curse. May a thunder enter you through the ears. It should then polish your intestines until they shine and leave through your feet, after which you should swallow an umbrella and it should open inside you. Yiddish may also appear very sentimental to non-Yiddish speakers because so many degrees of diminutive, and endearment are possible. Both English and French are relatively poor in their use of the diminutive, which in these languages is generally formed by adding the word little to, or its synonyms, to the noun. But Yiddish, like the Slavic and Germanic languages, makes it diminutive by changing the form of the word itself. And several levels of diminishment are possible, which may convey several nuances of meaning. For instance, Katz in Yiddish is a cat. Ketzel is a smaller cat. Ketzele is even smaller, a kitten. Ketzishi is still a kitten, but used as an endearment for a person. Ketzinyu and Ketzunka are other possible variations. So I share this award with gratitude with all translators for making the literature of the world available to me and to all peoples of the world, no matter what language they speak. Because I do believe that literature is the primary way in which we can come to understand one another. When translators sit down to their work, they are engaged in more than mere transposing of thoughts and phrases from one language into another. Sometimes, as in the case of Yiddish, there is much more at stake. My mother once wrote, and this is a quote, that if writing is a lonely profession, then the Yiddish writer's loneliness has an added dimension. Her readership has perished. Her language has gone up with the smoke of the crematoria. She creates in a vacuum, almost without a readership, out of fidelity to a vanished language, as if to prove that Nazism did not succeed in extinguishing that language's last breath, that it is still alive. That's the end of the quote. Translators from threatened languages like Yiddish are engaged in snatching from the jaws of oblivion that which is in danger of being swallowed whole by the present. Translation is a most honorable calling. It is the preservation of the past in the present, of one language in another. Translation allows literary works to exist in languages where they never existed before. I thank all translators for their work and for having devoted their lives to breaking down the barriers that separate us, thus alleviating the curse of the Tower of Babel. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, these are the Canadian Jewish Literary Award honorees for this year. I would like you to thank them and to recognize them. A replay of this afternoon's celebration gala will soon be available on the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards YouTube channel, so you can all catch it again. As we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards, we reflect on its role as a pivotal event in the Canadian Jewish cultural calendar. A nonprofit organization, the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards annually recognizes and rewards the finest Jewish writing. These awards not only uplift our community, but also significantly contribute to Canada's literary landscape. You can join us in the celebration of Jewish literature by making a tax-deductible donation. We invite you to stand with us by supporting the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. Together, we can uphold the rich tapestry of Jewish storytelling and affirm our enduring spirit. And you could go to our website, cjlawards.ca, and click on the How to Donate button. I want to thank Lisa Roy and the Miles Nadal JCC for hosting us so graciously today. I want to thank all the volunteers and the staff for their hard work in making this a memorable afternoon. On your way out, stop by the Miles Nadal JCC promotional table just outside the theater where you can pick up flyers about their special events. And we invite you to join us in the lobby and cafe for a celebratory dessert reception, and in the Jacobs Lounge where you can purchase these award-winning publications from Ben McNally Books and to meet the authors. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards thanks you.